come to work out sometimes. Marie has, I've known Marie for many, many years. She brought her grandson here when he was little. We did story time together. And she called up and asked if we would accept the 4-volume biography of Julien Levy called The Man, His Gallery, and His Legacy. And when she mentioned that, it was the perfect timing because we're celebrating our centennial this year, and we've been intentional about choosing programs and events that kind of highlight our library, our town, and the special people that are part of our library, but also that have lived in our town and have a legacy. So we were very excited when Marie said she would do a presentation. So I'd like to introduce Marie Difilippantonio. Very good, right? That's your many years. Don't ask me to spell it though. And we're really looking forward to hearing all about Julien and his life here and in Bridgewater, but also beyond. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to just turn the lights down a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming. I would first like to recognize Beth Gates Warren, the co-author of Julien Levy, The Man, His Gallery, His Legacy, and to acknowledge her invaluable contribution to our 15-year project to document the story of Julien and his gallery. My talk today may seem somewhat like a speed dating session as I attempt to tell you about Julien Levy, his gallery, his legacy, and the women artists he championed in less than an hour. Here we go. Julien Sampson Levy was born in New York City on January 22nd, 1906, to Edgar and Isabel Isaacs Levy. Julien's father was a successful real estate developer, so Julien and his siblings grew up with all the comforts of a lavish lifestyle. Despite his very average grades, at the age of 17, Julien was accepted to Harvard. The faculty there was especially illustrious during the years Julien was in residence, and there were also several students, later dubbed the Harvard Modernists, who would play important roles in Julien's life, even though their years at Harvard did not entirely coincide with his. In the spring of 1926, Julien became bored with his academic life, abruptly withdrew from Harvard, and moved back to Manhattan to pursue a career in filmmaking. In October of that year, Julien struck up a friendship with Marcel Duchamp, who had recently arrived in New York City for the sale of John Quinn's collection of Brancusi sculpture at the Bremer Gallery. Although Marcel was almost 2 decades older than Julien, the two got on well together, especially after Duchamp discovered his young friend's interest in making avant-garde films. Marcel was also impressed when Julien succeeded in convincing his father to pay $1,000 for Brancusi's white marble version of Bird in Space. Duchamp, who Julien would later claim as one of his adopted godfathers, invited Levy to accompany him on his return trip to France. And on February 26, 1927, they sailed out of New York Harbor on the SS Paris. Also on board was the writer and publisher Robert McAlmon, and he and Julien soon became friends. Shortly after their arrival in Paris, McAlmon invited Julien to a party at Peggy Guggenheim's apartment. That evening, Julien found himself in the company of Hemingway, Ezra Pound, and Jean Cocteau, along with many other well-known individuals who frequented her salon. He also met 2 women who would change the course of his life. One was the painter and Dadaist poet Mina Lloyd, the other, her beautiful 19-year-old daughter, Joella. Julien later maintained that just before meeting Joella, he had dreamt about a girl who wore her hair in a style known as snails, with braids coiled over both ears. By June, Julien and Joella were openly declaring their love for each other, And despite misgivings by both Julien's father and Joella's mother, the couple was married in Paris on August 5th, 1927. A few weeks later, the newlyweds, accompanied by Julien's father Edgar, sailed for New York City. On July 14th, 1928, Joella gave birth to a baby boy who they named Javid. In the autumn of 1929, after fulfilling a commitment to his father to complete a 2-year stint working in Edgar's real estate development company, Julien applied for a position at the Via Gallery. In December, he started his new job as an assistant to the director, Carl Zagrosser. On March 9, 1930, Julien and Joella welcomed their second son, Gerald, into the world. In November, Julien organized a successful exhibition of Eugene Atte photographs at the Via Gallery. But by the end of 1930, he was again becoming restless and began mulling over a potential opportunity to fulfill a long-held dream of opening an art gallery. Julien's mother had passed away shortly after the end of his freshman year at Harvard. In her will, she had left the amount of $20,000 to Julien, which he was to inherit on January 22nd, 1931, his 25th birthday. The moment Julien had his inheritance in hand, he resigned from Via, and he and Joella began looking for a rental space to house a gallery of their own. One of the most promising locations was a brownstone at 602 Madison Avenue. The 20 by 50 foot space on the 4th floor was already divided into 2 rooms that could be used for exhibition galleries. And there was also a tiny office and a compact storage area. Best of all, there was an elevator that provided access from the ground level and a large showcase window by the front entrance that was included in the rent. Julien signed the lease, and during the summer of 1931, he and Joella made a buying trip to Paris. After their arrival, Julien traveled on alone to Berlin to connect with photographers and filmmakers there, while Nina Loy, who knew most of the painters in Paris, helped Joella spread the word about their new gallery. As Julien's plans solidified, he asked Mina to act as his agent in establishing a dependable channel of communication between her artist friends in Paris and his gallery in New York City. Mina took on the role with some trepidation, as she knew that it would require a great deal of organization and attention to detail. But her relationships with the artists were what counted most, as they knew and trusted Mina, while her son-in-law was still an unknown quantity. Julien Levy was a visionary who instigated many changes within the American art world. His first move was to announce that his gallery would showcase the work of living artists. That decision alone distinguished him from most other art dealers in the United States in 1931. Years later, Julien spoke about how the gallery operated as a creative force. All the artists, all sorts of people used to come in and use it as a sitting room. They'd catch liquor, drink sherry with me in the back room, and we'd talk. Everyone would profit from that, exchanging ideas. I'd had a museum director's training from Harvard, but I had to be on my own. Couldn't take orders from my father, from trustees, from anyone. So I was going to have a little museum of my own, a gallery that was more than just a selling place. Even though Joella had lobbied Julien to open the gallery with a survey of European photography, he had instead decided to pay homage to the early efforts of Alfred Stieglitz, another man Julien would later call his godfather, by mounting an American photography retrospective. The inaugural show at the Julien Levy Gallery opened on November 2nd, 1931. Julien and Joella were the epitome of chic. The newly refurbished gallery was small but impressive, and the range of American-made photographs on the walls offered a thought-provoking and aesthetically stimulating pictorial history lesson. Julien's press release noted that the gallery plans to present a series of interesting exhibitions of paintings, drawings, and sculpture, but believing it to be high time that photography as an art be given the sanction of a gallery, will in particular devote itself to that medium. Another aspect of the gallery's work will be an intimate cinema projection room, where will be shown significant new experiments in the art of the cinema. In January 1932, the Julien Levy Gallery was the first to mount an exhibition of surrealism in the United States, and Julien chose to use the French spelling on the cover of the exhibition catalog designed by Joseph Cornell. Included in this landmark show were works by Salvador Dali, Max Ernst, Pablo Picasso, Pierre Roy, Jean Cocteau, Man Ray, and Herbert Bayer, among others. A columnist at Art News opined, "A pleasant madness prevails at Julien Levy's new and interesting gallery. Mr. Levy has been at considerable pains to inform us what these ultra-modern men are up to, and he is to be congratulated on the well-rounded lineup of the surrealistic camp." The critics were impressed by Julien's audacity. He had made his mark early by establishing himself at the age of 26 as the art dealer who brought surrealism to the U.S. During 1932, Mina Loy continued to provide a great deal of help from Paris by working directly with artists Salvador Dali, Pavel Telchev, and Eugene Berman, all of whom required a great deal of attention. Joella was also instrumental to the success of the gallery, as she was there almost every day, working to install exhibitions, greet the clients, and generally keep the gallery moving forward. While Julien was in Paris on a buying trip in the spring of 1932, Joella informed her husband that she was giving a show to Sandy Calder beginning on the 12th of May. Calder had been in touch with Julien, asking whether he might be interested in showing Calder's new mobiles. Julien had already seen a few examples and was not impressed. So he had left the decision up to his wife. Thus it was Joella, not Julien, who mounted Calder's first show of mobiles in the United States. The year 1936 started on a high note with the birth of the Levy's third son, Jonathan, on March 28th. On the gallery schedule were exhibitions by Magritte, de Chirico, Leonor Fini, and Max Ernst, culminating with a blockbuster Dali show in November. And Julien's book Surrealism was to be published in December. However, during a visit to France in June, Julien began a dalliance with Leonor Fini and spent 10 days in Normandy with her before sailing back to the United States. Leonor, still infatuated with Julien, mailed packets of love letters to him, which were intercepted by Joella, who was summering in New England with the Levy's 3 sons. With his marriage on the verge of imploding, Julien began drinking excessively. During the summer of 1937, he indulged in yet another affair, and that November, Julien and Joella signed an informal separation agreement, although their divorce did not become final until 1942. In October of 1937, Julien moved his gallery to a larger space at 15 East 57th Street. But in the summer of 1941, with the threat of war looming over the world, Julien announced that he would temporarily close his Manhattan gallery. He planned to travel to the West Coast, where he would exhibit a selection of paintings by several of the artists he represented, a traveling caravan of modern art. Returning to New York City just after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Julien rented space at Der Locker Brothers, where his friend Kirk Askew was gallery director, and he mounted 7 exhibitions there before reopening the Julien Levy Gallery in March of 1943 at what would be its final location on the 4th floor of a brownstone at 42 East 57th Street. Each of Levy's galleries had a unique appearance. Traditional velvet wall coverings were replaced by sleek white walls. Although he painted one room Harvard red in his first gallery and one wall black in his second, Julien also designed a sinuously curved wall in the second gallery space that allowed viewers to ponder one artwork at a time. He believed that his primary role as a gallery owner was to present art well. So he devised a display system that consisted of a double row of decorative molding strips placed 2 feet apart and attached to the walls at a comfortable height for viewing. The moldings were grooved top and bottom so that photographs or drawings could be sandwiched between 2 sheets of glass and slipped into the grooves, keeping each artwork securely in place without nails. When Julien exhibited paintings, they were well spaced and hung at eye level instead of being stacked on top of each other, as was often the case in other art galleries. Rather than sending engraved invitations and catalogs to a select few, as was the norm, Julien produced clever, eye-catching exhibition announcements and catalogs that often incorporated designs contributed by the artists themselves, as well as essays by noted art world personalities. Instead of the usual hushed exhibition openings, Julien invented the cocktail vernissage and held noisy parties where the public was always welcome. On occasion, he also supported worthwhile educational and fundraising efforts by offering his gallery as an event venue free of charge. Julien was also the first to exhibit Disney animated celluloids, as well as drawings by comic strip artists and book illustrators, thus laying the groundwork for the pop art movement 3 decades later. In his estimation, high art and low art were of equal importance. Julien's second wife, Muriel Streeter, was born in 1913 in Vineland, New Jersey. In 1932, she began studying with Franklin C. Watkins in Philadelphia and worked as an artist's model to earn money. Muriel and Julien met on board the ship that carried Julien to France in 1937 for his final European visit prior to the outbreak of the Second World War. Julien and Muriel began an affair which continued throughout the summer, and this was the final nail in the coffin of Julien and Joella's marriage. After Muriel returned to the U.S. in the autumn, she and Julien rekindled their relationship, and Muriel moved into his Greenwich Village apartment early in 1938. In 1943, the couple moved to an apartment on the 5th floor above the Julien Levy Gallery, now located at 42 East 57th Street. And in March 1944 and 45, the couple spent the summers on Long Island with Max Ernst and Dorothea Taney. After visiting with artists Yves Tanguy and Kay Sage at their home in Woodbury, Connecticut, Julien and Muriel decided to rent Kay's cousin David Ayer's house in nearby Roxbury during the summer of 1946. Early in 1949, hold on one second, do I have this? Oh, that's correct. Okay, sorry. Early in 1949, at the age of 43, Julien became disillusioned with the art world. In April of that year, he closed his gallery, and he and Muriel left New York City to live year-round in the farmhouse, where they hoped a new lifestyle would lead to a more stress-free and relaxed existence. Unfortunately, exactly the opposite happened, and having so much time on their hands seemed to worsen their mutual dependence on alcohol. The couple separated shortly after Julien's 50th birthday in late January of 1956, and their divorce became official on December 14th of that year. And I did miss one, and I don't know what happened to it. There, that's it, okay. There we go. It was thanks to Julien's third wife, the former Jean McLaughlin Davis, that Julien finally succeeded in conquering his addiction to alcohol. Jean Levy was one of the first women to pursue a career in fashion advertising, working as a copywriter in several upscale New York City department stores. In 1955, she was introduced to Julien Levy by mutual friends, and the couple married on January 20th, 1957. In the spring of 1959, in a letter to his first wife, Joella, Julien wrote, "We find ourselves involved in the building of a little house down in one corner of our property, near the brook, overhanging it, in fact. This began simply with the need for a tiny lean-to, in which I might do some writing at a distance removed from the housekeeping details and out of Jean's way. But no sooner thought of than a proposition was made from a magazine, Woman's Day, to partly finance a vacation cabin they already had on their drawing board, and which they wished built to be photographed by April 1st. When the structure was finished, it was featured in a 5-page color spread in the August 1959 issue of the magazine. The small house on Hatshop Hill Road was only 20 by 20 feet. It featured a small kitchen and dining area, a living room with an 18-foot ceiling, a balcony bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower. The total cost was around $4,000. I'm sorry, I think the slides were my papers were a little mixed up. I want to go back to this because it really has to do with the library and Julien. To quote Julien's, okay, let me go back. Yes, okay. This is after Julien and Muriel decided to rent Kay's cousin David Hare's house in Roxbury. To quote Julien's own words from a talk he gave at the Burnham Library in the spring of 1959, it was by visiting the Tongis and later renting David's house for a summer that I became acquainted with this countryside and determined one day to live here. The landscape changed so beautifully and suddenly as I would cross the old bridge, follow the stream through the woods on Route 133, and then out onto the ridge with a glimpse of the old cemetery tucked down on Christian Street. In the village, I always took occasion to stop at the store and exchange a few words with Bruce Randall. I was to buy my home here sooner than I expected. This came about on a visit to Gorky the year the snows laid so deep. He and his family were living in Sherman. To pass a Sunday afternoon, we went house hunting, at my suggestion, down Bridgewater Way, and I fell in love with my house, more exactly with the land and the little corner by the brook down Hatshop Hill Road. In April 1948, Julien became the owner of a 62-acre property on Christian Street in Bridgewater that included a mid-18th century farmhouse, a large barn, and a few outbuildings. The house stood on a rise called Hemlock Ridge, surrounded by rolling countryside. And here we go. With Jean's encouragement and support, Julien enjoyed a highly productive second career, using the new studio to resume working on his memoir of an art gallery, which was published in 1977. In July 1973, Julien and Jean bought a wooden building on Rocky Hill Road on the opposite side of Hemlock Ridge from the farmhouse. Set on approximately 27 acres, their new abode had once been a hay barn, so they began calling it the barn house. And Jean set about renovating and expanding the existing structure. In the mid-1970s, Julien began teaching classes in art history and filmmaking at nearby SUNY Purchase and in southern France at the Lacoste School of the Arts. He also began giving lectures about surrealism to a whole new generation of students, museum goers, and art collectors. On April 6, 1978, Julien and Jean decided to move once again and purchased a home where their friend Norman Mailer had resided in the mid-1950s, which was just across Rocky Hill Road from their barn house. A stately 9-room dwelling built in 1799 with marriage maples planted on each side of the walkway. The interior included 5 fireplaces, unusually fine woodwork, and superb examples of early wood graining. After Julien's death in 1981, at the age of 75, Jean dedicated herself to promoting Julien's legacy and established a foundation in his honor. In June 2001, a major acquisition of photographs from the Levy collection was made by the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and in September of that year, the museum dedicated and officially opened the Julien Levy Gallery. After Jean's death in 2003, she was buried alongside Julien in South Cemetery on Christian Street. The art collection was entrusted to the Paris auction house to Jean, who mounted a very successful sale in October 2004, accompanied by a catalog titled Tribute to Julien Levy, Works from the Collection of Julien and Jean Levy. 874 lots were offered for sale over a 3-day period, and 43% of the sold lots went to French buyers. In June 2007, in honor of Jean Levy's efforts to preserve her husband's contribution to the American art world, the board members of the J.L. Foundation officially changed the organization's name to the Jean and Julien Levy Foundation for the Arts. And now we come to the women. And I love this image of Frida Kahlo. One of Julien Levy's most noteworthy accomplishments that has long gone unacknowledged was the fact that between November 1931 and mid-April 1949, Julien mounted 30 solo exhibitions for 24 women artists. Levy's willingness to recognize and promote their work becomes even more salient compared to the Museum of Modern Art's exhibition history during those same years, when only 3 women were given solo shows. Today, I want to briefly introduce you to these 24 amazing women, presenting them in the chronological order of their first appearance at the Julien Levy Gallery. When Julien Levy visited Paris in the spring of 1927, he befriended photographer Bernice Abbott and engaged her to take his portrait. Abbott relocated to New York City in 1930, and in September 1932, Levy opened the fall season of his gallery with photographs by Bernice Abbott, her first solo exhibition in the United States. Abbott's documentation of the disappearing buildings and historic byways of New York City prompted critics to compare her images of Gotham to Eugene Adjay's photographs of Paris. Elizabeth Miller was born in 1907 in Poughkeepsie, New York. In the late 1920s, she began using the name Lee, a variant of one of her childhood nicknames, likely because it was sexually ambiguous. In 1929, Miller traveled to Paris, where she developed both a personal and a professional relationship with photographer Man Ray. By the spring of 1932, they were no longer together, and when Julien arrived in Paris in May, he wasted no time in taking advantage of Miller's availability. After a summer fling, are you getting a pattern here? After a summer fling, Levy returned to New York City, determined to mount an exhibition of Miller's work. And on December 30th, 1932, her photographs went on view at the Levy Gallery. The press release proclaimed, "The new light on the horizon of photography is Miss Lee Miller, who went to Paris to study painting, but discovered instead the contemporary medium of photography." Lee Miller's show at the Julien Levy Gallery was her first and only solo exhibition during her lifetime. Throughout her life, Mina Loy identified herself foremost as a painter, but she was also a groundbreaking poet and a writer. She has been labeled as futurist, Dadaist, surrealist, feminist, and modernist. On January 28, 1933, Julien gave Mina Loy her first painting exhibition in the United States, consisting of 11 works, all of them done in shades of blue that gave them an otherworldly, mystical atmosphere. The blue paper catalog cover featured a simple line drawing of 2 faces, 4 upraised hands, and 4 stars, all simplified versions of elements that appeared in Mina's paintings. In December of 1936, Mina Loy finally succumbed to her fears about war breaking out and fled Paris for the safety of New York City. Helene Sardou's sculpture exhibition opened at the Levy Gallery in February of 1934. A native of Belgium, Sardou's showing consisted of more than 45 works in 6 different mediums. Frank Crowninshield, the legendary Condé Nast editor, wrote a laudatory essay for the exhibition brochure, which was printed on vivid pink paper stock and mailed to gallery goers in a matching pink envelope. In 1923, photographer Martha Wynne Richards dropped her given name and became known simply as Wynne Richards. She was best known for her portraits of fashionable women, so it is not surprising that her Levy Gallery showing in April of 1934 was titled Photographs of Women Prominent in Fashion. Alice Hughes at the New York American noted, "These 48 images are photos of women who have muscled their way into men's fields and established themselves as authorities to be reckoned with. They are powerful, sure of themselves, intelligent. Many are at the top of their success." Cora Elizabeth Berry, ending with a Y, was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1898. But according to her Levy Gallery press release, Corinna DeBerry, ending with an I, was born 10 years later in 1908 in Nice, France. Oh, there's a whole story about her. And you can read it in the book. DeBerry also claimed to have been married to an Italian count, giving her the right to use the title Countess. The auburn-haired beauty would continue freely embellishing her past for the rest of her life. DeBerry's show opened in November 1934, and many of the paintings on view had been completed during a summer DeBerry spent in Rockport, Massachusetts with Italian-born sculptor Antonio Salemme. DeBerry worked in bright, strong colors and applied her paint in thick impasto passages. The reviewers were generally kind in their comments, especially the male critics who were entranced by her. By the time Leonore Fini and Julien Levy met in Paris in June 1936, she had participated in several group exhibitions all over Europe, and word of her success as a portraitist had spread. Also known for her outrageous behavior, Fini fully lived up to her reputation and Julien's expectations. He would later describe her as a woman whose parts did not fit well together. Head of a lioness, mind of a man, bust of a woman, torso of a child, grace of an angel, and discourse of the devil. Despite the strain on Levy's marriage caused by his recent summer affair with Feeney, Levy proceeded to make plans to show her work concurrently with Max Ernst in November of 1936. Although she had misgivings about seeing Julien again, Feeney made the voyage from France to be present for her first solo exhibition in the United States. Titled simply Leonore Feeney Paintings, her exhibition catalog was similar to Max Ernst's and included contributions from poet Paul Eluard and painter Giorgio de Chirico. Although Feeney was disappointed in her exhibition, she later agreed to have a second show at the Levy Gallery. Recent paintings, Leonore Feeney, went on view in February 1939, and the 14 paintings shown were earthy, provocative, and sometimes humorous. Art News reported that her ladies air their smoothly painted neuroses, which will undoubtedly entertain the spectator as much as they entertain the artist. Her craftsmanship is fine, her pattern is sometimes delightful, and her ability as a portraitist is unquestionably excellent. Julien Levy showed Alice Halika's work in early February 1938, perhaps at the urging of her friend, the neo-romantic artist Leonie Burnham. Halika's exhibition of paintings and romance capitonné focused on a group of 20 collages from her quilted romance series. One of the collages in the show was lent by Catherine Dreyer and subsequently gifted to Yale University Art Gallery, where it remains today. Arabian Nights is meticulously crafted using the trapunto quilting technique to give the tableau three-dimensionality, incorporating swatches of patterned silks and satins, bits of braid and lace, and cuttings of human hair coaxed into miniature coiffures. It's amazing. I've seen it in person. It's absolutely amazing. Florence Kane was already a well-respected art educator when her exhibition opened at the Levy Gallery on February 9, 1938. The majority of the 21 paintings on display had been painted during her recent travels to Mexico and Guatemala, and Levy was successful in selling 7 of Kane's paintings. Bet you didn't expect this one. On September 26, 1938, paintings by Gracie Allen, radio star and wife of comedian George Burns, opened at the Levy Gallery. Julien touted Gracie's purported artistic skills, calling her a mad Michelangelo with the mind of a surrealist. Allen played her role to the hilt, titling her paintings with nonsensical phrases such as, "Man with Mike Fright moons over a manicurist." It was all a lighthearted farce concocted for publicity's sake to raise money for medical aid to Chinese refugees. 9 months later, the story reached an entirely new level of absurdity when an article in an Athens, Ohio newspaper revealed that the paintings exhibited by Levy and promoted as Gracie Allen's handiwork had been created by a very broke Hollywood artist who was paid $5 per painting by Allen's crafty publicity agent. Of all the artists, Julien, oh, whoops, it skipped. Oh, bad. You don't want to miss this one. Of all the artists Julien Levy represented, Frida Kahlo seems to have been the one he most admired. Surprisingly, very few of the voluminous books and articles written about Kahlo emphasize just how important her exhibition at the Levy Gallery was in building her reputation as an artist. Given how famous she is today, it is difficult to believe that Levy mounted her first and only solo exhibition in the United States during her lifetime. Kahlo and Levy began corresponding near the end of 1937, and Levy decided to show her work at his gallery. At his request, Kahlo sent a brief summary of her life, telling him, "I never had any exhibition before. I was always shy and afraid to show my things. I never knew I was a surrealist until Andre Breton came to Mexico and told me I was one. I myself still don't know what I am. The only thing I know is that I paint because I need to." By mid-October, a total of 25 artworks had arrived at the gallery. Levy's press release noted that Kahlo's paintings combine a native Mexican quality, which is naive, an unusual female frankness and intimacy, and a sophistication, which is the surrealist element. Breton contributed an introduction to the catalog in which he called her paintings pure surreality and described her art as resembling a ribbon around a ball. Her show opened on November 1st, 1938, and the response to her work was phenomenal, with virtually every New York City critic covering the event. Kahlo was on hand throughout the exhibition, dressed in her colorful Tehuantepec garb and with her long black hair braided and entwined with ribbons. Levy was mesmerized by Kahlo, and during her time in New York City, they began an affair. Levy photographed her in his photographed her in his Greenwich Village apartment. So that's a photograph by Julien, nude from the waist up, while she arranged her coiffure in a choreographed ritual he later described as a fantastic liturgy. One night, on the spur of the moment, Levy and Kahlo boarded a train headed for Pennsylvania, where they visited department store owner Edgar Kaufman Sr. in his recently built home, Fallingwater, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. There's a story there too. On January 14th, 1939, Kahlo departed for Paris, where Breton had promised to mount another exhibition of her work, and she came away from that experience disappointed and disillusioned. After returning briefly to New York City in late March, she then departed for Mexico the following month. After her return to Mexico, Kahlo and Levy continued to correspond until 1947. Beth and I are delighted to announce that we have been able to include both sides of their previously unpublished correspondence in our book. It makes for fascinating reading. Maud Cabot Morgan, a descendant of the Boston Cabots, had her first solo exhibition at the Julien Levy Gallery in mid-November 1938. Likely due to Morgan's family connections, almost every newspaper and art journal covered the opening, and the show garnered excellent reviews. In October 1942, Julien gave Morgan a second exhibition, and among the 20 paintings on display was musical squash, which was acquired by Morgan's friend, Mrs. Nathan Todd Porter, for $200 and subsequently donated to the Museum of Modern Art. The exhibition, Marila Lednica Sculpture, opened at the Levy Gallery at the end of November 1938. After her exhibition, the Polish sculptress was commissioned to create works for two churches in New Jersey, and her limestone statue of St. Anthony of Padua still stands near a brook behind St. Bridget Catholic Church in Padua. After learning that General Franco was on the verge of installing his fascist regime in Spain, Ione Robinson wrote, "If I were a man, I would volunteer as a soldier and fight for the Spanish Republic. Being a woman and an artist, I feel that what I should do is draw. In September 1938, Robinson traveled to Barcelona. Finding the city in ruins and food supplies virtually non-existent, she began sketching in orphanages and hospitals. In early November, she flew to Berlin just in time to witness the Nazis unleash a wave of violence in Germany. After returning to the U.S., Robinson was repeatedly asked by the press to give eyewitness accounts of the recent atrocities she had seen. And this may have prompted Julien Levy to offer 28-year-old Robinson her first solo exhibition in New York City. The show opened on December 9, 1938, and on display were 30 of Robinson's drawings and paintings depicting the plight of those widowed and orphaned by the Spanish Civil War. A reporter for the New York Times found them extremely effective, writing, "This tremendously sympathetic work by an artist with a true flair for the medium." That face is just haunting, isn't it? Although Irene Rice Pereira and her husband were divorced, she continued to use his surname and the initial of her first name in signing her paintings, possibly to hide the fact that a woman had created them. Paintings and collages by I. Rice Pereira went on display at the Levy Gallery in February 1939. The orange-hued cover of the exhibition catalog included simple graphics that were a reference to the geometry of her paintings. Inside was a listing of the 15 canvases that were on display, including Pereira's curves and angles, which was also exhibited in 1940 during the New York's World's Fair. Born in what is now Serbia, Milena Pavlovic Borelli, known professionally only by her first name, was a distant cousin of King Alexander I of Yugoslavia. During the summer of 1939, Milena decided to travel to the United States, and sometime after arriving in New York, she met Julien Levy, who offered her a solo exhibition. Levy prepared a press release touting Milena's patrician background and informing viewers that although this was her first American exhibition, she had already shown her work in various European cities. Her show went on view at the Levy Gallery in March 1940, and those reviewing her exhibition were much impressed by the tall, striking young woman with the regal bearing. They were also quite taken with her paintings, in which she had melded a curious mix of precise Renaissance-style technique and settings with dreamy, mystical subject matter. By the time Tamara de Lempicka's exhibition opened in April 1941, she had already achieved considerable fame. But Levy was not prepared for the paintings she chose to exhibit at his gallery. Instead of the glamorous portraits of the French personalities that had led to her previous notoriety, she displayed touching likenesses of humble peasants and religious figures. The catalog cover featured her painting Wisdom, and at the opening night cocktail party, the artist took the opportunity to be photographed standing in front of her Mother Superior painting with Dolly at her side. While no one faulted Lempicka's technical prowess, one critic did compare the dramatic spotlighting of the paintings within the darkened gallery to a secular cathedral. Following Lempicka's painting exhibition at the Levy Gallery, her husband, Baron Raoul Kuffner, asked Levy to come to California and mount 2 shows of her work there. The Kuffners were very pleased with the way Levy had handled Lempicka's New York City exhibition, and they wanted him to recreate the same ambiance in San Francisco and Los Angeles in order to introduce her work to California collectors in the most advantageous way. In return, the Baron agreed to finance Levy's efforts to bring a caravan of modern art to the West Coast during the autumn of 1941. born Catherine Yarrow fled to New York City during the Second World War. In May 1943, her first solo exhibition, Ceramics by Catherine Yarrow, was on view at the Levy Gallery in conjunction with a show of bird-related collages and drawings by Max Ernst. Art News proclaimed that it was Bird Month at the Julien Levy Gallery and described Yarrow's work as distinguished pottery handsomely decorated with fanciful bird abstractions. In the autumn of 1943, Xenia Cage began seeing a psychiatrist to help her adjust to her inevitable divorce from avant-garde composer John Cage. And during this period, she began to craft rather delicate mobiles, different from Calder's in that they were lighter, feminine, and made not of metal, but of wood strips, with insets of paper. Perhaps encouraged by Ernst and Duchamp, Levy decided to give the first solo showing of Cage's latest constructions. Julien and Xenia designed a clever single-sheet catalog that doubled as a template for a do-it-yourself mobile. Cage's exhibition went on view in December 1943, consisting of 11 mobiles, which Levy would later describe as abstractions of the marriage between a kite and a canoe. Dorothea Tanning had been working as a commercial artist when Julien came to her apartment sometime in late 1941 or early 1942. Impressed with the 2.5 paintings she showed him, he immediately offered her an exhibition as soon as she had completed enough canvases. Years later, Tanning reflected on how she had looked forward to displaying her paintings in his gallery. Of all the gallery activity on 57th Street, where everything happened in those days, it was the Julien Levy Gallery that was truly making art history, the place where it was at. The prospect of seeing one's own work on its walls was breathtaking. In the late spring of 1942, Levy invited Tanning to a cocktail party at his apartment, where she was introduced to Max Ernst. Unhappily married to Peggy Guggenheim, Ernst was fascinated by Tanning, and within a few months, they began an affair. The couple spent the summer of 1943 in Arizona. On April 1st, 1944, Tanning's long-awaited solo exhibition opened at the Levy Gallery. Tanning designed an exhibition announcement which depicted the elongated shadow of a woman standing in front of a closed door and reaching skyward. Her drawing for the cover of the exhibition catalog reflected the topography of Sedona, Arizona. And Ernst, whose show at the Levy Gallery opened 3 weeks later, wrote an admiring introductory essay. Among the 20 canvases shown in the exhibition was a portrait of Muriel Levy, Julien's second wife, painted by Tanning in 1943. In fact, this was really a double portrait in which Muriel's head appeared partially enveloped by a billowy, transparent membrane that echoed the shape of Julien Levy's profile. Can you all see that? Isn't it just amazing? After several postponements, Tanning's second exhibition at the Levy Gallery opened on January 6, 1948. 23 canvases were shown, and the reviews were stunningly positive.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Let's cross this off.
It's ready to go home. Okay. Art News described Tanning as one of the most gifted young surrealists. Her second show fulfills the promise of the first. Miss Tanning's visions are personal and real. They speak of the child's lost safety and an adult's open terrors. No less impressive, though in a more playful mood, are such small pictures as Max in a blue boat, a charming portrait in a bright fairyland. In addition to painting, Tanning began working in various mediums for the remainder of her long life, including collages, works on paper, and soft sculptures. She also devoted much of her time to writing, and in an interview in 2004, proudly called herself the oldest living emerging poet. The intrepid Dorothea Tanning died in 2012 at the age of 101, having outlived every one of her artist colleagues. Soon after her marriage to painter Earl Miller in 1935, Henrietta Myers began signing her work using the name Peter Miller, as she was convinced that collectors would take her paintings more seriously if they thought a man had created them. Her first solo exhibition in New York City opened at the Levy Gallery in May 1944, and many of her paintings were based on the design motifs used by the Native Americans who lived in Miller's beloved San Ildefonso Pueblo near Santa Fe, New Mexico. Levy obviously thought Peter Miller was an artist with considerable potential because he mounted a second showing of her work in October 1945, featuring 19 new paintings. The critic at Art News reported, Peter Miller, perhaps the only painter who has combined the imagery of Moreau and the art concepts of the American Indian sand painting, is offering her recent canvases at the Julien Levy Gallery, and most of them show her developing a more immediate expressiveness. Catherine Lynn Sage, known as Kay, met artist Yves Tanguy in Paris in 1938, and they fled to New York City in 1939 due to the threat of war in Europe. Sage and Tanguy were married in 1940 and subsequently moved to Woodbury, Connecticut. Recognizing Sage's aesthetic progress since her return to the United States, Julien decided to show her work in October of 1944. Simply titled Paintings by Kay Sage, the 18 works displayed were stark and refined, featuring draped images and geometrical backdrops that were both mysterious and majestic. The reviews were positive, but virtually all of them emphasized her marriage to Tanguy instead of her talent as a painter. In October 1947, Sage's second exhibition at the Levy Gallery went on view, consisting of 11 oils, all completed during the past year. Gone were the monolithic figures that had populated her previous paintings. Instead, only their draperies remained. Her Ring of Iron, Ring of Wool was one of the first examples of her new approach to painting, with its lack of figural elements and its off-kilter umbrella-like structures. The title is believed to refer to traditional 6th and 7th anniversary gifts, marking her 7th anniversary with husband Yves Tanguy and their 6th year in Connecticut. In 1955, shortly after his 55th birthday, Yves Tanguy died suddenly due to a cerebral hemorrhage. Sage ended her life in January of 1963, but left behind several notes written in her iconic style. One explained her suicide as the means by which she sought to attain her ultimate destiny. The first painting by Yves that I saw before I knew him was called I'm Waiting for You. Now he's waiting for me again. I'm on my way. Can't get through that one ever. It was likely due to Levy's longtime friendship with Marcel Duchamp that he gave sculptor Maria Martins a solo exhibition in late November 1947. During the past 3 or 4 years, Maria had been involved in an intense, surreptitious affair with Duchamp, so he might have approached Levy on her behalf. Martins, who went by the mononym Maria, was then married to the Brazilian ambassador to the United States. She had previously shown her sculptures in 4 exhibitions mounted by Manhattan art dealer Valentine de Denson. But when he unexpectedly closed his gallery in the spring of 1947, she needed another venue where she could show her latest work. André Breton was among her many admirers, and he contributed a lyrical essay to Levy's exhibition catalog. Many of Maria's sculptures were inspired by the Amazonian gods and goddesses who purportedly inhabit the Brazilian rainforest. One critic enthused, "In this show, Maria has a far more forceful expression than ever. No other sculptress is at once so much female and so little feminine." By the time her exhibition ended in January 1948, Maria already knew she would soon be moving to Paris because her husband had recently been named the Brazilian ambassador to France. Her departure left Duchamp saddened and depressed. But he had a plan that would allow him to keep Maria with him for as long as he wished. That scheme involved assembling plaster casts he had made of her body and placing them into a 3-dimensional setting that only he and Maria would understand. Perhaps some of you have visited the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where Duchamp's startling scenario, now titled Étant Donné, is on display, turning viewers into voyeurs, just as Duchamp had intended. If you haven't seen it, you should. Mosaicist Jean Renault's first solo exhibition in New York City opened at the Levy Gallery in late October 1948. Appropriately, it was scheduled to partially coincide with a memorial exhibition for her close friend Arshel Gorky. Included were 16 mosaics, and the show received positive attention from the press. Levy chose one of the mosaics for himself, which he would display in his Connecticut home until his death in 1981. If anyone was ever at their last house, that was right in front of all the fireplaces. In conclusion, to fully appreciate Julien Levy's ability to recognize talent whenever and wherever he saw it, it is important to remember that most of the artists who made their American art world debuts at the Julien Levy Gallery were not well known in the United States at the time, but would eventually comprise an amazing roster of names that few art dealers could ever hope to equal. During the 18 years his gallery was active, Julien Levy displayed all forms of art created by all sorts of people. His tastes were tantalizingly diverse, his motivations mostly altruistic, his aspirations limited only by his own shortcomings. The range of his accomplishments looms large within the art historical record, and future exhibitions featuring the artists he championed will only grow in number. I will answer questions, or I can just stay here and whoever wants to leave and I can answer questions. Over on the table, number one are my cards, so if anybody wants to contact me, my email address is there. The book is over there. If anyone wants to purchase the book, you can go on the Julien Levy website, and it's we have it on for $150, and that's delivered postage, postage free by U.S. Media Mail. So if anybody wants to read the 4 volumes and you have nothing better to do, and but you can pick out all the stories because each of these women have a chapter, and they are, as does every artist who exhibited there. So the first volume is a biography, and it's about 360 pages. And then the other 3 are chapters on each artist, and there were 137 artists or group exhibitions, so we covered them all. There's also some books, white with white, no cover on them, and those are Julien Levy's memoir of an art gallery that he wrote and was published in 1977. We had some extras in my basement, so we brought them. Please take one if you want. If there aren't enough, I will bring some back to the library. But help yourself. It's there's a little fiction in there, but Julien had a really great way of telling the story too. So it's interesting reading, and it's not as long as ours. So I think that's it. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you.